Hi there, the festive season's here, so in this video we're making this wire-wrapped Christmas bauble. Let's get wrapping. So to make this, we need a polystyrene ball, papier mache ball or bauble, just something as a base to work on. And I'm going to use a round, but you could use a different shape if you wanted. Then we're using 1mm diameter copper wire, which is 18 gauge, 0.4mm diameter copper wire, which is 26 gauge, some fine scrap wire. This project's perfect for using up your scraps. And I'll be using 0.4 and 0.25mm diameter wire, which I believe is 26 and 30 gauge. Then we'll also be using some ribbon and a bead, which is optional. And then the tools we'll be using are round nose pliers, bail making pliers, chain or flat nose pliers, wire cutters, a paint and brush if you want to change the colour of your base, and some pins if you're using something like a polystyrene base, or if your base is more solid, use some glue. So let's start with creating that base layer, and if you're using a ready-made bauble as a base, you might not need to colour it. I could use this one as is, but you might need to adapt the top of the bauble to work around the existing fitting. But I'm going to use a polystyrene ball. This is fairly dented, but that's fine. And the first thing I want to do is paint it. Now, one other thing that's helpful here is to have something like a cocktail stick, so you can hold the polystyrene ball as you're painting it. And then I'm just going to paint it with some red acrylic paint. And I've got an old piece of polystyrene packaging here that I can pop it into to dry. Now once this first coat's dry, we can paint a second coat on it. And once that's dry, we can take the cocktail stick out. And we're ready for the next layer. So now we're going to use our scrap wire. And I've sorted out all my coated copper scraps, so this will stay a nice shiny bright copper. And I've even got some twisted wire here. You could use uncoated copper and then just varnish it at the end. And I just want to take any pieces that are kind of wrapped up on their own and splay them out a little bit. And of course you could do the same with some new wire, just take a long length and start scrunching it up. So these bits of wire are already quite nicely tangled together, and we're just going to scrunch them together a bit more and gradually create a nest. We're trying to keep the layer fairly even as we do this. And if any pieces fall out, we can put them aside and use them later. So we'll just keep scrunching this together. And pulling the sides up a little bit. And then we can put our base bauble inside. And carry on scrunching that wire around the ball. It will be fairly loose at the moment, don't worry about that. We're just trying to get the whole thing covered in a fairly even layer. And if we've got any ends sticking out, we can thread them through. But we don't need to worry about them too much at this stage. And this is still sitting quite loosely around the ball, so we want to start tightening that up. And to do that, we're going to take our round nose pliers, pinch a couple of the wires and twist. And we're just going to keep doing this around the whole bauble. And we can move those wires if there are bare spots as we go. Now you'll start this and think this is never going to work, nothing's ever going to happen. And it does take a bit of time, but if you just keep working on it, it will eventually come together. And this is a great thing to do in front of the TV or when listening to a podcast or some music or something. Now I've been working on this for some time, And as you can see, it's tightened up around the ball quite a lot. And as you find ends, just pull them tight. And then you can use those ends to thread through and tie in any pieces that are a bit loose, or cover areas that are a bit bare. And with these pieces, if you weave back and forth, they'll hold themselves in. You can then go back and twist those wires and tighten it up even more. And this is my last piece. I'll just thread it through. And then tuck the end in under the other wires. I like to create a little loop on the end. Just helps stop that end from coming loose and coming out. And there we have our base layer, and we're ready to start wrapping. For the wrapping, we need 4 pieces of the 1mm wire. And we need it to be able to fit around that bauble with a generous amount left over each end. I think I've got about 4 inches each end here. You don't really want to skimp with this because this is going to form the embellishment at the top of the bauble. And then I'm also using 4 meters of the 0.4mm or 24 gauge weaving wire. This is quite a lot, but we are starting from the centre, so we're only weaving half of that at a time. But if you're not comfortable weaving with that length of wire, use a shorter length and we can add in more later on. So we'll take the first of our frame wires, find the middle of that, so we're working from the middle of both the frame and the weaving wire. And we're going to wrap the weaving wire 3 times around the frame wire. Then we can add in our second frame wire and wrap over both wires 3 times. We're then going to go back and wrap just that first wire 3 times. And then both wires 3 times again. And we're going to continue with this 3-3 wrap until we've got enough to cover one side of the bauble. We can clamp over those wraps as we go with our flat nose pliers, just to settle the wires. And that's got our wrapping halfway around the bauble. So we'll then go back to the middle, and with our flat nose or chain nose pliers, we want to bend both of the frame wires outwards. We can then add in another frame wire and take the other half of our weaving wire and start wrapping the new frame wire and one of those arms together. So we'll wrap 3 times around both of those wires and then 3 times around just the bottom wire. Three times again around both wires and 3 times around that bottom wire. But we'll continue this for the same number of wraps as our first pair. We can then go back to that centre and bend the new wire 90 degrees outwards. Then take our 4th frame wire and a new piece of wrapping wire and wrap 3 times around the centre. We can then place that into the centre of our frame and wrap 2 wires 3 times. then just that lower wire 3 times, and continue wrapping as before. Then we can bend the centre of that final wire by 90 degrees. But before we wrap that final pair, we might want to use that wrapping wire to add a bead. Now I've got this nice glass bead here, and we could just thread it on and wrap that over. But I think it'd look better if the bead's sitting upright. So I'm going to take that weaving wire through the centre of the frame, up through the bead, and then over the side of the bead. I'll then take it through the frame and the bead again, make sure it's sitting nicely, and take that wrapping wire down the other side of the bead. Now we could do this another 2 times, so we've got 4 wires creating a cross on that bead, but I think it's going to hold there quite nicely as it is, so I'm going to leave it with just 2 wraps. We can then go back to our frame wire and wrap that last pair in exactly the same way as we've done before, wrapping both wires 3 times and just the bottom wire 3 times. And once we've put the same number of wraps on as we've done on the others, we've got this cross shape that will fit around the bauble. We can mould those a little bit, and we could put it on the bauble just as it is, but I think it gets a little bit lost. So I'm going to add some ribbon underneath that wrapping. So I'll pin the end of the ribbon onto the bauble. I'm just pinning it lightly at the moment. Then we'll wrap that ribbon right the way around the bauble, so we can work out the length we need, trim it to that length, and then we can pin both of those ends. Then I'm going to do exactly the same at 90 degrees. I like to use the same pin for this just so I haven't got a huge collection of pins at the end there. But it will be covered by the wire work at the end anyway. And if you're using a solid bauble rather than polystyrene, you can glue these ends down. And I'm going to put another pin right at the bottom in the centre. And then just to stop those ribbons slipping around, I'm going to put a pin in halfway up each side. Now we're ready to add that wire work. We want to position it so it's centred on that ribbon. And I'm going to fold 2 opposite sides over the top. Now I can see the wrapping stops just a little bit short of where those wires are going to cross. So I'm just going to take the bauble out and wrap a little bit more on each side just to get to the centre at the top. We can then fit our wire wrapping back on. And I'm just going to use a pin through that bead at the bottom to make sure it doesn't move. And I think I'll also put some temporary pins up the sides, just to hold those wires in place whilst I'm working on the top. Now this is optional, but it does help me a lot, particularly so I don't have to worry about them moving whilst I'm showing you what I'm doing elsewhere. So I've got back to where I was with 2 opposite sides of the frame crossing at the top, and I'm going to bend 1 wire of each of those back. I'll just move these other sides out of the way so you can see a bit better. think those would be better swapped over. And then with those 2 remaining wires, I'm going to put in a loop. Just thread the end of that wire around so I've got a full loop there. And I want it to be sitting as close as I can get it to the bauble and as central as I can get it. And then I'm going to do the same with the other wire coming from the other side. And this can be a little bit fiddly, but it's just finding the way to get the easiest access in there. And try to get those 2 loops so that they're lining up. Just pull the ends of those wires quite tightly. And that should mean they're sitting nicely and those loops are sitting together. We can then bend the ends of the other 2 sides back. And I'll just pin those into place as well. And then we want to take 1 wire from 1 pair and move it across so it's sitting alongside the next wire around from the other pair. And we're going to do this for all of the pairs. And then we're going to wrap those new pairs of wires together. Now we could use the same 3-3 weave that we used for the rest of the frame, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit and wrap both of those wires twice, and then I'll wrap over just 1 wire 7 times. This will just provide a slightly different look. And actually a bauble like this is a great opportunity to test out some new weaves and see if you like them. So feel free to try some wild experiments here. And we will be wrapping these wires a fair way, but I find it easier to get each of the pairs started first. So I'll get that wrapping started on each of the pairs in the same way. And if you find, like I have, you've got 2 sides that aren't joined together, you can take the weaving wire through at the centre and use that to bind the wires you're about to wrap with the previous set. This just helps hold that cross at the top in place. And then the amount you wrap on each pair is up to you, but you want to leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inches at the end. Then we can bend that wrapping around to create a loop. Just use our flat nose pliers to help shape it. Then we're going to take the weaving wire through the centre at the top of those frame wires to catch it into the frame that's going round the bauble. Make sure that weaving wire is nice and tight, and then wrap a few more times around one of the frame wires. We can then trim off that weaving wire and we'll do exactly the same for the other 3 pairs. We've now just got these ends to deal with. Then I'm going to take my bow making pliers, but you could use your round nose pliers for this, and just create a little spiral on the end. I'm trying to pull it kind of downwards and make that spiral a little bit looser as we go. And then I'm going to sit it in the middle of that loop that we've just made. And I just want to turn it so the end's facing inwards. Quite happy with where that's sitting. So the other wire to that pair, I'm going to take in the opposite direction. So just bend that over so it's outside the loop. Then I'm going to do the same, making a little loop on the end and spiralling it downwards. Just create a nice curve at the top. And then we can pull it into shape and into position. And I'm just going to sit this one in between those loops. And then do exactly the same for all of the other wire ends. And you can mess about with these wires a bit until you're happy with where they're sitting. And you can even remould the shape of those loops a bit if you're not happy with them. Then all I need to do is take out those temporary pins, thread a bit of ribbon through the loops at the top to hang the bauble with. And our bauble's finished. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want some quick makes over this busy season, why not check out this playlist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.